Okay. So as Carol said, I'm going to talk about the project The Weight of Ants in the World, which I've been working on since spring 2018. And the project focuses on a small pocket of ancient woodland called 20 Pound Close, which is in the centre of Team Valley Industrial Estate in Gateshead. And I've been thinking about the wood as a witness to industrialisation. I've been working on a long-form film documenting the wood across the changing seasons, sound works, archival research and photography. And as a result of the project, there's also been a degree of activism, securing protection for the woodland. And I plan to do more work with members of the public surveying the site's wildlife. Okay. So I've just got a few images here that show the work on display at South London Gallery, an event which reflected on the work of Artists Placement Group. And this was the first time that I'd shown the work. That's Barbara Stavini, who sadly passed away last year, who's one of the founders of Artist Placement. And seems fitting to show this here because Artist Placement famously coined the phrase context is half the work. And what I'm hoping to do here is give you a little bit of background context that feeds into the wood. And so because I think a huge part of working in this site is about thinking about context, really. It's really quite important to the work. So I'm going to give you a bit of that background, and I'm also going to do a kind of reading with photographs and sounds which introduces some of the themes of the project, but also hopefully operates as a way of almost like sharing the work with you more directly rather than me just describing what the work is. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit more around this context and the context of environmental activism, which is kind of referenced at various points in the text that I'm going to read and in the work I've been making in the woods, and also is sort of significant to me in terms of I was involved in sort of environmental direct action in my 20s, and that was quite an influential experience, I suppose, and informed a lot of what I'm doing now. So it's a very brief overview, and there are going to be some references to a project called Trees Not Tarmac, Stories from the M65, and that's available on my site. And what I'll do is I'm going to put together some links that relate to some of this. So I'll just show you a couple of these images from when I had this work in London. I also have some of these bits here actually, which I brought. I don't know if you can see that. This is a piece of a sanded, it's a piece of a tree that was felled, and I sanded it. And I quite liked having these things which are kind of tactile and approachable, as well as photography. And this is lichen, pollution tolerant lichen. Since Victorian times, lichen's been used as a measure of air quality, and this kind of lichen, Xantharia polycarpa, is very tolerant to pollution in sulphurous and nitrous atmospheres, which very much reflects the setting of the wood. So anyway, there's a bit of that. I first encountered the wood in 2015 when I was researching early colliery rail lines for a heritage project, and I organised a walk which traced the route of the Thames Way, which transported coal from County Durham to the Tyne for transport to London. These lines were the first rail lines in the world, dating back to the 17th century, and the Thames Way was in operation from 1668 to 1966. And this is a map from a book called Railways Before George Stephenson. This map's in Tyne-Wear Archives, and I think it's from 1786. I might be remembering that wrong. This line here is the Thames Way. And this little bit, this is the river Thames, and this little area here is the woodlands, 20 Pound Close, which I realised when I went back to the map, having met the wood. You can see on this map, this is from the 1850s, that shows the woodland, the old wagonway mark there, which runs right along the edge of it, and then the main branch of the Thames Way, which is listed as a colliery railway. And here you can see how the landscape has changed around the wood, and here's the wood, over that map overlaid on a contemporary map of Team Valley. So you can see that this is now a the whole area was completely built up with factories. And the river, which used to go around the edge of the wood, now has been canalised and straightened, and the wood is divided by a road and a river. Let's go on. Sorry, I'll just go back to that for a second. So I think this just helps to put it in context a little bit. And when I first encountered this wood, and I started to think about it as a witness to industrialisation, and I'm kind of really interested in it, in the fact that it's barely changed in size and the way that the landscape has completely changed around it. I'm thinking of it as a fixed point around which the world has changed. But when I say that I'm thinking about it as a witness to industrialisation, it's not just some generalised view of that this is now an industrial area. Really, I'm thinking very particularly about these rail lines. And I had this kind of image of the woodland watching the coal and the landscape that's embedded in that coal, travelling, you know, along its edge and just across the fields from it for hundreds of years. And that coal was being transported to London and completely enabled the expansion of London and, you know, the establishment of London as a force in the modern world. So I really do think of that, you know, that witnessing as something that's quite significant. And, you know, I was very much trying to think about this as a way that you might take a very specific, small, and really, frankly, quite overlooked piece of landscape and think about its connectivity to the world and our connectivity to it and it to us. Prior to planning the walk, I mean, literally days before, I had visited Stanworth Valley in Lancashire, an ancient woodland and the site of a road protest, which I was involved in during
Michele,
the 1990s.
Michele, sorry to intervene, but you are lagging a little bit. I wonder if it would.
I've stopped the video. Hopefully that will be better now. Yeah, is that better? Okay. I'll read this bit again. Prior to planning the walk, I'd visited Stanworth Valley in Lancashire, an ancient woodland and site of a road protest, which I was involved in during the 1990s. It was the first time I'd been back in 20 years, and I think spending time in that ancient woodland made me notice the age of the woods in Team Valley when I visited them. This is an image from that visit, and it's a wood anemone, which is an ancient woodland indicator species, plants like this, and English bluebells and dog's mercury and all kinds of other things are indicators that this wood has been here for a long time and is undisturbed. Oh, what's happening there? Got it. Right. Here's a view of the valley, and this is the viaduct which carries the motorway, which we were protesting against. It's actually, you know, visually I don't find it hugely intrusive, but the sound from it is incredibly disconcerting and completely changes the quality of space. And an incredible place, and a small piece of polypropylene rope that will have been there for 20 years is a remnant of the protest, because we used this to create rope bridges between the tree houses which we used to occupy this space. And I took this photo really because moss is growing in and around the polyprop, which just seems so typical of this place, which is unbelievably rainy and beautiful. Okay, so the following photos, and there is one of those rope bridges. Following photos are from the work I made in 2014, Trees Not Tarmac, and were gathered from protesters at the time. I was interested in these images because they came from within the protest and had a vernacular quality. None of them are mine. In fact, at that time, I had ideological opposition to the idea of taking photos even. I made a slideshow featuring the photos and memories from people involved in the campaign, and in the process it became apparent how photography had been used by protesters as a means of protection against rough treatment by security guards during actions, a way of reshaping the dominant narrative and telling our own stories, and also as a mirror to the surveillance we all experienced from the police and the government during the campaign. This work was initially exhibited in London at an event called Passport to Pimlico and included a slideshow, artifacts and accounts from the eviction, which people lent to me. I'll just show you a few of these images. This is at the point where the road was getting very close, and people are here sort of surveying the valley. That there'll be civil engineers and members of the campaign are sort of disrupting that action. This guy will be one of the head security with his red hat, and you can see he has a camera. Here you get a sense of what the living in the woods was like. These are the tree houses that people were living in, and you had to prusik up a rope and abseil back down to get in and out of your home. I didn't live there full time, but I did spend a fair amount of time there and have slept in these, and it's quite amazing. One of the, actually this is an aside, but one of the amazing things about looking at these images again was I got this sort of forgotten view actually of what it was like, the view from in the top of the trees looking across. And here, you know, complete, you know, sort of contrast maybe, but as the road approached the top of the valley, and this is people basically doing a kind of direct action to stop, you know, sitting on machinery, stopping people from working. But here you see that the ubiquitous camera of the security guards is there, and this photo will probably have been taken because the person, the security are deemed to be being a bit rough. So it's like that sense of using the camera as a kind of protection, and also I think it is really mirroring how we were being treated. At the time, as a fine art student, I tried to make work about this experience, and I'd been unable to do it, working from the context of an individual studio-based art practice. After making the work, I reflected that one thing which had changed in the intervening years was that my work had become more collective in its aims, less about personal expression, and more about expressing a collective and common or societal concerns. So this, yeah, I don't think I need to explain that really. Anyway, so this work was created in 2014, and in 2018 I helped to organise an exhibition at Star and Shadow Cinema, which is a volunteer-run cooperative cinema very near in Newcastle, and that brought together photographic and video work connected to environmental activism, including work by Jackie Scollin, Adrian Arbib, Simone Ridolfi, and Jane Gower, who made banners, and then there was publication material from indie media organisations like Schnews. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. This is a photo I took at the time of making the other work. It's a tree branch which had been saved by one of the people from the campaign. That was the ash tree that she had protected. This is, the work was very roughly put together at Star and Shadow, but we had this kind of shelf with various different bits of text and reading material. We also had video work from Jackie related, we had work related to Pont Valley and Stanworth Valley. It wasn't, you know, this was about protest more generally. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read you the exhibition text, because I think this kind of sums up why we brought all this material together. This exhibition has been created in response to the screening of Tales of Resistance, the Battle of the Newbury Bypass, and brings together video work, photography, publications, banners reflecting on 20 years of environmental activism. The show features material related to 90s road protests and from the campaign to protect Pont Valley against open cast coal mining, which is ongoing. The title is drawn from a slogan used as part of that campaign and is featured on the miners' banner on display here. Sorry, I should say the title of the exhibition was Respect Existence or Expect Resistance. The directness and simplicity of that statement belies the complexity of the situations these protests have engaged with. In almost every instance, direct action has run alongside prolonged engagements with planning departments at all levels, legal challenges and court cases, often running over many years. In the case of Pont Valley, local people had campaigned against the open cast site and had had their concerns upheld by planning for over 30 years, before UK Coal, latterly Banks Mining, were eventually granted a licence to extract coal from the site. These campaigns ran far deeper than a generalised concern for damage to the countryside. Many of the sites destroyed by roads in the 1990s were designated as sites of special scientific interest. The Newbury bypass alone included 3, and the land of Pont Valley was a haven for ground nesting birds and contained ponds which were home to great crested newts. In both cases, the protests also included people from a broad range of backgrounds, including ecologists, farmers, people concerned about climate change, political organisations, and local people determined to protect the landscapes and wildlife on their doorsteps. By bringing this work together, we hope to draw attention to the similarities between these different campaigns, separated by time and geography, and to ask why these hillsides and valleys, which were valuable havens for wildlife and often recognised as such in law, were not deemed valuable enough to protect by the governments and councils which were supposed to advocate for nature on our behalf. Sorry. I'll just run through some of these so you can see the images. These are some of Simone's photographs and some of the banners included. And this is a banner which was created by Jane Gow, a miner's banner. It was paraded at the Miners' Gala. So hopefully, you know, this is a bit of a brief introduction to that work really, but hopefully that gives you a sort of wider context to what I want to share with you now, which is the work I've been doing in the woods. And hopefully it will make sense to you why I've also brought that work in. Right, where are we? I'm going to, can I just stop sharing for a minute because I need to put something in the chat. So what I'm going to do now, I've put an audio file in the chat and I will just share again. And what we're going to do is, if you would like to, it's by no means compulsory, but if you would like to, and please make sure your microphones are muted, what I've put in the chat is a link to this Dawn Chorus recording from the Woodland, which was made in June 2019. And what I would like, if you are up for it, is for you to play that in the background. You can adjust the volume as you like. If that interferes with your hearing of what's happening more generally, then by all means turn it off. And if you would bring it to about 19 or 20 minutes into the recording, because the first section is very quiet, so you can't really hear the birdsong much until that point in the recording. So if everyone would like to find that, it's just in the chat, and if you could maybe start your birds, and I will do this little reading now. Here we go. Right. It might be ancient woodland. It's an unlikely place for a plantation. I wonder if it's wet woodland on a floodplain. Lots of mature trees have been cut down along the riverbank quite recently, and I think some of the stumps have disappeared since I first went there 4 years ago. Comfrey, red campion, rosebay willow herb, ash flowers on the concrete. 2. I'm fascinated by the mature trees on the edge of the wood. They have deep textured bark, which is unfamiliar to me, and the sheer size of them is awe-inspiring. I think they might be black poplar. I need to go with someone who knows though, maybe get a botanist or an ecologist on board. I like the idea that I might have to identify plants and wildlife in the process of making the work, a kind of artistic survey perhaps. Lords and ladies, dead nettle, bird cherry, jack by the hedge. Some of the photos are nice, but without the sound of industry, which is ever present, the context is lost. It could be wildwood, which it is, but just to look at it, you might think it was still rural. The whole place is set around. Sound is key. Nettles, brambles, elderberries, leaves turning yellow. 4. Looking at all of this, I think I need to go monthly. I feel like the work needs mass, time, commitment. It needs to be a process of reconnection or connection to nature. I want it to have some force conceptually, long form, expanded, temporal, to evoke the wood's age, mass, and endurance. sycamore, holly, oak, elder, beech, birch, white willow, pigeon, roots, litter. 5. September the 20th. Back again. The willow herb is turning yellow. There's quite a lot of change in just a week. The day after the storms, and the effect on the wood is quite dramatic. In the larger part of the wood, a couple of trees have snapped off at the top. Heavy branches lay across the path, patterned with lichen. I find a huge waxy leaf and take it home in books. Art theory repurposed, I indulge the idea that Bart and Benjamin might somehow filter down in a drying process. The leaf is from one of the big trees, which I now know are hybrid black poplar. It's far bigger than any I've seen before. A friend who studied botany tells me it's because it's from the top of the tree where the leaves grow bigger, as there's more light. The ground is becoming more open and easier to walk through. 6. I'm enjoying working on this. Perhaps it's the simplicity of being in a bounded space, working into something smaller. I'm starting to love the trees. They fascinate me, and I wonder about making a series of photographs of them. October the 2nd. I saw a bird flying across the river. I think it's some kind of wagtail. It had a bobbing way of flying and flicking its tail up and down. It swooped along the river as I watched and landed on an old tyre in the water. I met someone who worked in the trading estate who told me that there are kingfishers on the river. Grey wagtail, pheasant, seagulls, crows. By 1:30, the light was low and warm. It's definitely getting like winter light now. The trees with clouds behind them remind me of Constable. There are black poplar in the haywain. I keep thinking about this reference, the turn towards objectivity, cloud studies, working landscapes. Hybrid black poplar, sometimes known as railway poplar. October the 17th. I need to go back on Sunday. The cars are really dominant. They need to be there, but not all the time. I need to hear other sounds. Establishing shots of the wood, up the river valley, through the units, across the road with parked cars, from behind where the pallets are, looking up into the trees, the mist on the river, river which walled the wood in a wide window is straighter now and kept in check with concrete sides. My friend says she always feels sorry for a river when this happens to them. Maybe she's right. October 18th. Coal Action organised a talk by some Colombian campaigners. It was amazing. They were talking about their experience of open cast and the challenges they had faced as communities in the face of huge open cast mines diverting rivers. So many similarities with Pomp Valley, claims that the whole ecosystem could be removed and replaced, and huge amounts of corruption. Protesters had been killed. One of the most inspiring things was that miners and trade unions were supporting the open cast protesters. Their fight is our fight. We face the same problems, resisting the divisive rhetoric which so often sets work against environmental concerns. One of the sadder and more poignant things which stuck in my mind was the community activist who said that the noise from the mine woke people up and stopped them from being able to dream. He was talking about the women in the village who were seers or clairvoyants, guiding the community through dreams. The noise from the mine caused a break with the landscape, a disconnect. It stopped them dreaming, stopped them seeing. I found the text, A Walk in a Coal Forest. Lepidodendra or scale trees, cordites, cycads, megaphyton. The weight of ants in the world exceeds all human life. This is what I want the work to do, to bring mass, volume, detail, to redress the balance, to be dense, to bring the wood into another space, to assert its presence. 12. November 16th. Heron, robin, blackbird, swans flying over, couldn't catch them. I met someone who works in the trading estate talking about woodland management and cutting some of the trees down because of the health and safety. He doesn't think they're black poplar but hasn't an ecologist in the woodland, and I suggest getting in touch with the ecologist at Gateshead. And he said he'd put the felling on hold and look into it. I passed on my contact and had a good conversation, but I feel a little bit nervous about this. I've heard that the management company are touchy about heritage and conservation. I'm worried about the trees being cut down now and thinking about photographing them. Also thinking about taking rubbing from one of the stumps in the wood. 13. It feels like some sort of result. After a short conversation, 3 trees are being pollarded rather than cut. Hard to know if it'll survive, but I suppose it's something. It's depressing to think that such old trees will be cut down for health and safety. I suppose it seems that if I can work with people managing the woodlands, it might be more appreciated and better protected. Of the 5 trees that were going to be cut down, 2 are still coming down, the leaning tree and one in the middle of the wood. They say the trunks are rotten. 14. I knew there was a level of politics to this, but had imagined it to be more distanced, using the wood as a context or maybe a lens to look at the threat to nature. It feels quite shocking to find that I'm rubbing up against it in ways I hadn't imagined I would be so quickly with the threat to the trees. I emailed Claire, who said that I wanted to use the wood as a focal point, which made me think again about testing the moments, these sites as fixed points, points under pressure, places in transition. It will only be a matter of time when one will be able to point out the different factories that are built over the site that in former days was the haunt of the green plover, snipe, curlew, wild duck, and many others. 15, December the 4th. Very cold and frosty. Got to the valley just after 10:30 a.m. and stayed a couple of hours. The light was really nice and bright. Mist on the river was good. 16, morning, arrived just after 10. It was really nice shining down the river. Saw a grey wagtail straight away and a dipper. Dipper, coot, pigeons, crows, magpies. A buzzard flew right into the wood whilst I was filming, disturbing all the magpies who were shouting loudly at it. I didn't manage to get a picture. Over a road, there's already some cherry blossom out. I wonder if it might be an ornamental variety planted as part of landscaping rather than a wild cherry. 17th, January the 17th, snow. I saw what I think is some kind of thrush with speckled greenish yellow chests. I didn't manage to get a photo though. I need to listen back to the audio to identify. Film the snow falling from the trees in big feathery chunks, playing it back in slow motion. The sound of birds and industry take on an eerie, dreamlike quality. Redwing, song thrush, mistle thrush. Redwing, numerous throughout the autumn and winter months, always showing up in greater numbers than the fieldfare. I find that when the redwings first arrive, they're very wild and not easy to approach, but a few days of hard frost soon robs them of their wariness. Every autumn, I hear them passing over Gateshead at night on migration, their drawn-out, melancholy call note being unmistakably clear. I heard them passing over on October the 15th this year. Okay, I seem to have, that was the end point of that. I seem to have got slightly out of sync with some of the slides, but basically that text is something that I wrote for the event in London, and it's a collection of notes from my sketchbook. It's called Notes Towards a Film, which I forgot to say at the start, but it basically, I just feel like it's possibly a more interesting way of me sharing with you how this project has been unfolding as I've been making film work, but also and then how these photographs began to emerge. So I'll just quickly through some of these are the I made of the trees were under threat, 2 of which were cut down. These are the trees which were pollarded. And then this is a series of works which I made, sanding the stumps of the 2 trees which were felled, which felt like a kind of, action in a way, a kind of response to what had happened to these huge trees, and a way of just trying to pay attention to them, I think. And I produced this work, which is in part inspired by the huge piece. There's a huge round from a giant sequoia in the Natural History Museum with a timeline on it. And that tree is about 1,000 years old. And I think this tree was about 140 years old. And I sanded it in the wood in situ. This took ages, hours and hours and hours. So I sanded it by hand and then wrote a timeline on with pencil, and perhaps get and it had a kind of industrial and a financial history, which is slightly interwoven with the experience of the protest, which I was talking about before. So September 2008, the beginning of the global financial crisis. May 1995, the eviction of Stanworth Valley. 1972, Apollo 17 blue marble view of the Earth from space, which was referenced last night. 1966, the closure of the Thames Colliery rail line. 1946, nationalisation of the coal industry. 1936, building work started on Team Valley Trading Estate, and 1926, general strike. The creation of the trading estate was a response to high levels of unemployment in the northeast. So it's sort of like a way of trying to reference some of that industrial history within the life of the trees. Some of them started to grow again, which was quite incredible, just on the logs. And then all that work started to become covered in mold. And then when I went back in March last year, bafflingly, somebody had cut the end off it. I think someone was like going up there with a circular saw and trying their kit out. I'm not really sure. It's quite strange. I also got up there with different people. I went up with a friend who's a soil scientist, and we talked a bit about whether this might have been a floodplain woodland, and she examined the soil. And then this is like a very small thing that I did last year in the lockdown in response to HS2, which is going through 120 ancient woodland sites. It's hugely destructive. And I had this little piece of soil from that visit with my friend Lindsay, and I had that, it's still in my studio now. And I just kind of, because one of the things that they're saying when they're going through these sites on HS2 is that they are using this very questionable environmental process called translocation, where you basically lift the soils from the site and put them somewhere else, and that is in some way seen as preserving the habitat. I think it's ridiculous, but it's also what's happening in places like Pont Valley, where the open cast are kind of they lift the soil off in sections and then replace it. And with the Colombian miners who were speaking as well, that they're wanting to divert whole river systems, like hugely disruptive to ecosystems. So this was like a really tiny response of sorts to that, where I kind of quipped that I could just as well designate my studio as an ancient woodland. So I made this little series called Translocation Studio as Ancient Woodland. And just thinking of the planning and the sort of more sort of technical and sort of structural framework around the woods. As you will have picked up in the notes, I started a sort of engagement with people in the council at Gateshead about the woods pretty much as soon as I knew that they were in danger. And as a result of that, unfortunately not before 2 trees were cut down, we managed to put a woodland TPO onto the site. And this is a photo of the notice when it was there, and this like from the original TPO. What I would like to do is also work with the people who are managing the wood more generally to see if we could put something like a more sustainable plan in, and sort of maybe educate people a little more about the value of the site as an ancient woodland site. And what I'm hoping to do, the plan is that there'll be an exhibition of this work next year, and as part of that I want to do some sort of bio blitzing and surveying of the wood with people in the local area. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.